Hello, good morning, happy Thursday, and welcome back to Reaper Pro Tips with me, your host, Anne, and disembodied hands, Quindy, Justin, and John, and all of the peanut gallery. All of you. But you're worth more than peanuts. I'm not a big peanut fan, actually. You're probably worth cashews. I really like cashews. And pistachios. Those are expensive these days. But anyway, Cashew Pistachio Gallery. Hi, everybody. I'm a little random this morning. Okay, Quindy votes for cashews. You're here by the Cashew Gallery. Morning. Hey, new mini. Hey, Quindy, I totally forgot to text you about this, so you might have to change the name of the stream. Unless you looked on your happy monitor and saw the happy kitty cat. So yeah, I decided just call us all nuts. Yeah, true dat. Yeah. I think that's very suitable, Thoramel. Very suitable. I myself am pretty crazy, so you know. You can be the nut of your choice, though. You have that freedom. You can be what you wish to be. Yes, we're doing new. Oh, okay. Yeah! Super Quindy. Yeah, I decided I was not inspired to work on the basing for the ogre. Totally no inspiration. Didn't want to spend a stream doing something that I wasn't inspired to do, so I decided to start a kitty cat. I don't have the oomph just to do the basing today, Nara. I looked at it and I was like, I just don't care. And I'm like, then I'm not going to paint it. It's like, if I get a great idea, or when I get a great idea for how I want to do the basing on the ogre, then I will execute. But I don't see the point of like messing around when I'm not like in it. It's much better if you're looking at basing. It's much better to wait until you have an actual idea and then you get excited about it and then you finish the basing. But the ogre is, he has gravel on his base. If I painted the gravel, it would be a done gaming base, but I want to do rock formations. I just hadn't figured out how I want to do them. So the ogre is sidelined. I mean, he's pretty much done other than that. But I never say I have to finish anything on this stream. I do, in general, finish stuff on this stream. But at least the model is finished. You can base it how you like if you're doing, that sort of thing. Yeah, I'm just not into the basing. I was pretty much done with that model. Like, I'm just like, all right, this is good enough. Done. He is, after all, a monster and a gaming monster at that. He's not like he's a super fancy chieftain. He's just a really nice sculpt that I wanted to paint. So, yeah, I mean, it was me who decided to do more of the start to finish stuff on this stream. So, the way I see it, I can say I don't want to finish something at any time. And it has happened before. I'm usually, these days, I'm just much better at choosing a model that I do want to finish. But when I get to basing, often on gaming figures, I am very much a lazy baser, especially for gaming. I just throw some grass and gravel on it, or I do a really simple stone base and I'm done. So doing stuff like we did with the half orc, where I did an actual display base with runes and stuff, like that, I have to really like a model to put that much work into it. We are all nuts. Yes. But I can't be a macadamia nut because I think I have a reaction to them. It's just like I don't like them and I feel ill after I eat a few. Yes, Clavicus, exactly. I don't know if the mini's done, but I am. Although I do know the mini is done. For me, the mini is done. I mean, I may paint the basing. I'm going to let it sit, though, because sometimes it really is just not having an idea of how I want to do the basing around the model. How I want to execute it, what shapes I want. I know I want stones around it because I want that warm light reflection, and I know I want it to be in a deserty environment. It's just that I don't know how I want to execute that yet. I had an idea originally, but then I decided it just wasn't going to work, and so that kind of like put me on on a thing. I mean, it's very common for me to put aside a model and just kind of think about it. I do the same thing with my writing. If I don't have a solution right away, I let it percolate. And my subconscious will come up with something. Now, where did my pokey tool go? Oh, noes. Pokey tool. No, pokey tool, you mustn't go away. I have misplaced the tool. This probably means I threw it on the floor or something, but... Pokey tool. Aha! There's another pokey tool. Thank God I have a backup. Panic. Pure panic about the pokey tool. Oh, I seldom have a problem starting something, but... And it's also, remember guys, it's also that on this stream, I do feel like I want to do different things for y'all. So like, I don't want every basing to be the same. And so for me, and I hold myself to this, you know, this is nothing that Reaper told me I had to do or anything. But for me, I want to be able to do something new, and I want to be able to, you know, do something that's teachable essentially. So sometimes I just don't have that right away. Sometimes I need to stop and think about it and go, how do I want to do this? Ha! Yes, exactly. If Trash had done it, it would be different. I agree. So, what we're going to do is a kitty cat, because I want to do a kitty cat. And we're going to make this kitty cat an orange tabby, because we haven't talked about that color. Like, how would you paint that? I happen to have an idea, so I'm going to try to see if it works. So I'm going to start with the red hair triad, but I'm not necessarily going to stick to it. I'm going to use the highlight orange, because I want to start with a pretty light kitty cat, light orange. I'm going to put 4 drops of that down. And then I think I'm going to kind of look at my other colors here, but I think that's a good starting point. Not a tiger, but you know, I had an orange kitten when I was a kid. I always liked orange kittens. He got more of an apricot kitten color as he grew up. So I probably will use blonde hair to highlight it. But we'll see. We'll see, Inara. I mean, that was my immediate, you know, like thought, because like I said, my cat when I was a kid had, he definitely turned more blondish. As he got older, he didn't stay like as orange, but plenty of orange tabbies stay pretty orange. So we shall see. But yeah, I don't want to do black stripes on him or anything. I want to do a traditional orange tabby. And I also thought that it would be fun, because I just told you guys I was going to do more green, orange, purple. So I'm thinking that I want to do orange tabby fur and have his tabard accent color be purple. So he can be like a silver and purple color scheme, or his cape could be purple. And then I can think about what I want to do with the armor. But yeah, so I thought that I would do that. Morning to everybody. But yeah, you are absolutely on there, Inara. The blonde hair triad is what I would probably use to highlight this up. But I'm going to see how it feels as I lay it down. I am debating taking it just a little darker, but I think I want to keep him pretty light, and I think I want to shade with some of these other colors. So I think I am going to keep it just highlight orange, and grab some of my water, and we'll start with that. Yeah, I mean, it just varies by the genetics as far as whether the red-orange fades as the animal gets older or whether it stays strong. You can do either. But I do think this is the correct color to start as. So yes, highlight orange. If you don't have the red hair triad, by the way, it is extremely useful if you ever paint anybody red haired. I'm actually going to make it just a little bit stronger. Just because I know it tends to be a little bit, like it could have slightly better coverage, because we're dealing with mostly red and yellow pigments, and for the most part those do not have great coverage. So as we start out, we're going to keep that in mind. Oh, it does, and it does for a very specific reason. It's because the red hair triad has a lot of oxides in it. Whenever you have those earth colors, using another earth color, a la ochre, a la something that is, yellow oxide, works great with it. The oxides are great to shade and highlight each other. Like, they just work together. It's all that earth tone pigments. And the blonde hair triad has a lot of yellow oxide in it, along with just a tiny bit of other yellows and white. But that means that because you're taking something that has red and yellow oxide in it already, and then you're mixing in something with yellow oxide, it's going to work. It's going to work just like straight up. It has a tiny bit, the blonde hair triad also has a tiny bit of brown oxide in it. But the fact remains that oxides work with oxides. They work really, really well. And that's why the blonde hair triad works to highlight this red hair. It's how you can get a strawberry blonde if you want to paint one. Is I would start with the blonde. I would add in a bit like of orangey and not down to the auburn, but a bit of the carrot top in the shadows. Probably just a glaze. That's how you get a strawberry blonde. They're really tricky though, strawberry blondes are. They vary a lot in coloration. But usually that's how you want to do it, is keep your highlights blonde and in the shadows go down a little bit more reddish. So kitty cat. The one thing about this kitty cat is, there's his teeth. I needed to like, the details get so fine around the mouth that it's hard to see sometimes. But I'm going to paint in everything, as I am wont to do. Also using the orange, I thought an orange tabby would be fun because this color is going to mean that we can draw attention to his face, because orange is going to be very bright. Relatively speaking. Grumpy Cat didn't have a helmet on, so Grumpy Cat we could go a little bit more earth toned and still keep attention on the face. We had more room to do markings to draw the attention onto the face. Markings on an animal tend to read, well, they really, really are freehand, and freehand always draws the eye. But here we have a helmet, and that means we're going to have less tight detail to pull the eye to the face. So the orange will help us do that. The orange will help us do that, essentially, without having to do any extra work. Just choosing a color. Which is right. Red and blonde hair are good choices in general to draw the viewer's eye to the face of the model, because both tend to be, those are lighter, brighter, warmer colors, and so they tend to achieve that purpose. Uh-oh, I missed a little tiny bit of flash. 1 second. His little ear has a little tiny bit of flash on it. There. And you could probably use this character for either a male or a female, depending on whether Tabaxi have a mammalian character, humanoid mammalian characteristics in your world. If she's a girl, she's a bit like, she's wearing pretty flat armor. You could also like do a bit of an additional sculpt up here to broaden out to fill out the chest armor just a little bit, and that would probably be enough to suggest a female. If you wanted to, and it wouldn't be too hard. You'd just have to put a skin of green over the breastplate here and just kind of like pull it out more on the top, make it thicker, to suggest more of an hourglass shape, and keep the narrow waist, and you'd be fine. Hello, Julie. Was just talking about how to turn your male tabaxi or your male catfolk into a female catfolk. Just because we've got a little bit of leeway here where we could fill out the chest armor a bit. Everybody, hello. Okay, let's see here. So it seems like I'm trying to figure out if, and I see another bit of a flash I missed. But I'm trying to figure out if this character has gloves on, and maybe you could tell me, Julie, but it seems like maybe this character has gloves on. It would make sense for a paladin to have like leather gloves under the armor plating. It's a little hard to tell. You could probably paint it either way. Definitely does not have boots, but then what cat would want boots on? You can dig in with your claws ever so much better. Yeah, I think so. It kind of looked, the sculpt is very suggestive of gloves. So I think I'm going to go for that. I think I'm going to keep the gloves. And the orange down on the toes won't be too disruptive. I'm trying to figure out what I got here. I think that's still going to stay. I tried to get all the mold lines off of this one. Do we even have a Puss in Boots mini? Does Reaper have one? Like, I don't remember if we have what we've got for fairy tale characters, if we have any. There are some good cat fairy tales. I wish there were more. But if we don't have a Puss in Boots figure, Julie should surely sculpt one. Yeah, Leo really did not like Arizona. The grass hurt. The grass was prickle grass. It betrayed him. He did not like it. I'm going to go orange for the paws for now. I very much, because the orange is such a key accent on this piece, I don't know that I'm going to give this cat any white markings. I just really felt like orange tabby was the way to go on this one. Hey, Gurgi, long time no see. A Death Knight cat? That would be pretty cool. Hi, Beamer. Usually I do, not always, but usually I follow, there's a couple of rules in mini painting, and I say rules very loosely here, a couple of guidelines that people tend to follow when choosing what to paint first. And either of them would be fine. This one is called painting from the inside out, where I start with the skin and the hair, and I move outward from there. So if you started with the skin, then you would move to the hair, then you would move, to like with maybe the shirt or the breastplate, etc. The other school of thought is to paint whatever takes up the most room on the figure. So in that case, I would have started with the armor on this figure and done that. But I tend to like to establish the skin tone and the hair because I tend to choose other colors based off of those via color wheel theory. So that's why I started here, especially because I knew that I wanted orange fur. I wanted to do an orange tabby on this cat. So I knew that that was going to be a really strong color, and I probably would need to keep it in mind as I chose other colors for the model. So with that in mind, I decided to start with the fur and get it established and then work outward from there. But starting with the armor is also a perfectly good tactic. A lot of people will do that if they have a model with a lot of metal. They'll just start with that and go from it. I don't know. I tend to like, I guess one way we did that, we started actually on this lady, we did start with her dress colors because it took up so much room on the model, and I only just blocked in the skin. So she's an example of the other type of base coating theory. And on big models like humanoids, like the ogre, I definitely started with the skin on him because it took up so much space and because it's, again, painting from inside out. And then the model we just started, this is another one like the cat where I wanted to establish her skin tone first. So, and I knew she was going to have kind of silvery blue hair, like mage magical hair. So I wanted to establish that first and then, again, work all the other colors off of that. But I knew I wanted her skin tone to be a darker tan color, and I knew I wanted the hair to be really magical. So we started with those things and went out. And I tend to do that because I always have an idea of the personality behind the model. And thank you for the compliment. Yeah, the ogre's nice. And then like Hair Folk here, we also started with her fur. And then I moved outward from there. So like we just did the pants this week. I did the shirt right after I did the fur. We do a whole bunch of different models on this stream. If you haven't been here before, we do it every morning, every weekday morning I'm on, and we do a rotation of 6 different models. Yeah, the bunny's really fun to paint. She's getting there. But yeah, I do, I tried to do a mix of metal, Bones USA, and regular Bones models. This one is a metal model. And I do a bunch of different, subject matters, as you can tell. Lately, we're also doing a bust, because there was a bust that Reaper gave out for ReaperCon last year. Haha, I threw off the hat. So we've been working on a bust also, just so I finally have an opportunity to show people bust techniques on this stream. Reaper does not do busts generally. They have a few coming out from Bones 5. But because we haven't really had any, I hadn't had an opportunity to talk about like the particulars of painting a bust. But we now are working on that one, so I get the opportunity finally. So as you can see, we do a very wide range of techniques, and I do answer very, very beginning questions on this stream, even though I myself paint to a pretty high level. I never mind answering questions from people who are more beginner or intermediate, because a lot of people who watch this stream are like at that level. So never shy away from asking a simple question, because I always like to answer it, and it's probably going to help other people in the chat if you ask it. So I'm putting a second coat on here just to get a real nice solid color on the orange. Someone who just started pod, it's a matter of brush control, which will build naturally as you paint. So if you want to paint small stuff, it really pays to start because everybody's got terrible brush control at the start, but it's muscle memory. And so you can build that skill. So I would recommend starting with something a little bigger. Like the ogre. Actually, these ogres are a great thing to start on because the detail is so big and you have big expanses, but the detail's also chunky. Like it's easy to paint. There aren't a lot of really fine details on this for you to worry about. So a model like that is more simple. Another one that would be good would be like Madame Dahlia here, or Delia, where she's also got a lot of simple, although she also has a couple of fine details. The thing you don't want to pick is the model with a lot of tiny details, because then it's going to be frustrating to you. At all costs, avoid frustration as much as you can. I also want to say that I have a YouTube channel, just my own YouTube channel, which is Painting Big, which maybe Quindy can give us a link in the chat. I've been doing a series for beginners, and there are, I think, about 5 videos in it now. But one I did this last month was top 5 tips. Oh, wait, have I released that yet? Yes, I did release that. I think, yes. I'm losing track of everything. But yeah, top 5 tips for beginners, and that includes like kind of a little section on brush control and just like things like that. And then I talk about base coating, and I talk about washes and making your own. And we're just progressing essentially on that set. So there we go. There's my YouTube. Woohoo. Yes. And I am very interactive, Beamer. So when you say, ask a question, then I will get to it. Bull, I have not yet planned to do NMM or TNM for this mini, but it will probably be NMM because we've done a lot of metallics lately. And I'm kind of sick of them. So I think we're going to go back to NMM for this one. But yeah, there's my YouTube channel. And I talk about like brushes. I talk about stuff. I'm trying to kind of expand. And they're pretty short videos. They're between 7 and 15 minutes. I'm trying to keep them short. Some of them, I think the watch video might have gone a little longer, but you get the idea. And so go over there and take a look at my beginner videos, because that can really show you like what I'm talking about too. But yeah, so yeah. A non-metallic metal beamer. It is a, do I have anybody? 1 second. Let me see if I've got an example. Yeah, I do. It's a Dark Sword Mini, but I do. So you can do metallics on models, obviously. Let's see, what did I do here? Did I do it on Knoll? Yeah, Knoll's got metallics. So obviously you've got metallics, which is, you can see the shininess of the paint on the Knoll Pirate here. And this also, you can see, has a shine to it, where I did the metals on this and the hook. Or you can do using regular paint to suggest a shiny surface. So Mr. Corgi Warrior here is showing us copper NMM. He was just the one I had close to hand. I guess I did it also on Tiefling a little bit, but he didn't really have any metal, so he had tiny bits of metal, so not so much here. But yeah, so non-metallic metal is doing metallics like you would in a painting or an illustration or a comic book, where you have to use shades of gray to suggest steel, you have to use shades of yellow and brown to suggest gold, things like that. Hey, thanks for the gifted sub, Bull. Fantastic. Yeah. And so with NMM, with non-metallic metal, instead of depending on the shiny flake to give you that sheen, you would paint that sword in shades of gray and white and dark, and you would mimic that reflection. NMM gets criticized sometimes because obviously as you move the model, the reflection isn't going to move. So some people say it only looks good from like one angle. I tend to disagree. I think that well done NMM actually looks good from multiple angles. Like if I move this guy, for the most part, that highlight's going to stay on that sword, really kind of where I put it. It's only when I really turn him. And by the time I turn him to here, like if I was doing NMM, I would have highlighted this section too, so it would still look good. So I don't necessarily ascribe to that criticism of NMM. The reason that a lot of companies paint their models using NMM is it photographs better generally than shaded metallics. Shaded metallics like this can be very hard to get a good photograph of. Like you need to have your light sourcing really nailed in. And of course, anything that doesn't have light on it is going to not really show up very well on the camera. So, but they were also doing, like, the reason it works there, Twisted Oma, is because it's one viewing angle. You look at a painting, you look at it flat on, and the artist is controlling the exact angle that you're looking at it from. Same with comic books. A comic book panel is flat. You can only look at it from the angle the artist is presenting it. So that's why NMM works, it works very well in those mediums. I mean, back in the olden days, they sometimes would use real gold leaf to be gold, to represent gold and stuff like that. But yeah, in general, with modern graphic illustration, and the Dutch masters definitely were some of the ones who were best at, reproducing the effects of glass and metal in paint. But yeah, it's the 3D-ness of miniatures that makes NMM such a challenge, and which gets it criticism. But it photographs very, very well because you can control the highlights and the shadows so distinctly. And so a lot of companies will utilize it in their display models. Now, the techniques that you use to paint a good shaded metallic like that knoll, the metallics on the knoll, that sword, there's shading and highlighting on that. It's not just me putting down silver. And so you use, when you learn how to do non-metallic metal, the techniques that you learn for how to place highlights and shadows will make your shaded metallics much better in general. Because you're still trying to kind of do the same thing with both. Alrighty, so we've got our feet. We need to get a tail on this side. Need to get a tail on the back. Let me check, am I missing anything? Right, Valandar, which is why it's not really, I mean, doing NMM for tabletop, don't expect it to read like great when somebody has their models painted differently, right? But usually you're not doing NMM on a tabletop mini. I mean, maybe you are. If it's your D&D character, you could totally choose to do it. It would look awesome. And I don't think on a D&D gaming board, anybody's going to really be looking at light directions, so I would say that I would paint NMM anyway. If I wanted to for my D&D character. All right, orange tail, other side of orange tail. Yeah, the ball of yarn on the shield is adorable. Thinning paints is like, there's a lot to that topic. I mean, I thinned my base coat. This is thinned probably about 5 drops of paint to 1 drop of water. I have a whole video on this, a whole class on it, actually. Yeah, I'm not quite there, Corsair. There's just a tiny... Actually, I don't think so. I think that's armor. That's scale. That's this stuff. Back of the neck is the scale. I can see the triangles. Okay, so, Burr. There is a online class that I did for ReaperCon 2020, back when we were all like not doing in person. It is called Thinning MSP Paints. And there, Quindy, right in the middle of the chat there, she linked to it. So that's a long class. It's an hour and a half, but I talk about thinning paints, everything from base coating to layering to washes to everything. Like I go over the whole thing in detail. It is specifically geared toward Master Series paints as far as the ratios of water to paint go. So depending on the paint line you are using, you may need to switch that up. Because other paint lines often are a bit goopier and thicker than Master Series. You probably will need more water. But it'll give you an idea, at least, kind of how the ratios work for different techniques. And also it'll explain different techniques too, kind of like glazing, it'll explain that. So definitely should go watch that video. If nothing else, like click through to it and then bookmark it so you can, or leave it up on your browser so you can go back to it later. But that is the exhaustive video on thinning our paint line, our Reaper paint line. And I made this paint line. I actually was the person who created Reaper Master Series paints, and I made it at Reaper for 17 years before I moved out here to the West Coast to be with my guy. So I am the authority on this paint line. Other paint lines, as I mentioned, they use different bases, and those bases often are thicker. So you will have to kind of switch it up. But having at least an idea that, glazing should be thinner than washes, and this is what it should look like, that's a useful thing. I also have a Patreon, patreon.com/paintingbig, where I talk about all sorts of things. Arg. Though actually you've brought up a great one, and I should do a very short video on thinning paints. Although I talk a little bit about thinning your paint in the 5 tips video. 5 tips for beginners on the YouTube. But it really is quite an expansive topic, because you thin your paint to different levels depending on what you're trying to achieve. And you also can't just always use the same ratio for thinning paint depending on what you're trying to do. So like if you're trying to avoid brush strokes, then you have to thin lighter colors more than darker colors, and that's a function of the pigment. But this is a very, very lengthy topic. So really, if you have a thinning paint question, be more specific with me. What exactly are you trying to do with thinning paints? Like, you've got base coated models, so what are you trying to do that you are you shading? Are you doing a wash? Do you know what you're doing yet? Because my answers will be different depending on what you're doing. Thinning paint is all a part of learning paint consistency, which is one of the key things, one of the keys to becoming a good painter. Brush control and paint consistency, I would say, are like 90% of it right there. When you have mastered these 2 things, you will be pretty far along. All right, I think that's all the orange. The composition's okay. On the back, we're going to have to do some stuff on the cloak probably to draw the eye. We may make 1/2 of the shield orange. I haven't decided, because we've only got the orange down here, and then we've got a lot up top. We can't really see the back of that ear very well. If the ears were totally sticking out of the helmet, then we would see them better, but because the helmet is protecting his ears, as any good helmet should, you shouldn't be, Burr. Okay. If it's stressful, then you need to pick up a box of super cheap models or see if your friends have any that they just want to give you. And then work on those. And right away, set it to your brain, I'm going to screw this up and it's okay. I'm going to screw it up and it's okay because I'm learning and getting better. That's the dialogue you need to run through your brain. That's the mental game. And mental game is a whole different. Yeah, see, and Alfred makes just reiterated. Yeah, exactly. Just reiterated what I said. Yeah, you can strip them, but it depends on the material, and it's not ideal, Beamer. I would honestly just get some really cheap stuff. Reaper, okay, here you go, Beamer. You're going to hate me for this. But Reaper is about to start a new Kickstarter. It launches at the end of this month on the 31st. Usually, you can get models for super cheap on the Kickstarter. Like, you can get over 100 models for like, you can get it for like $1 a model. So if you really want to get a bunch of models and then you won't have to sweat about like ruining the few models you have, keep an eye open for Bone 6 Kickstarter. That's how to get a crap ton of models for super cheap. But yeah, you can, Cianara's like, get new ones. Buy the clearance models. Yep. Peter Mikhail is a good. See, this is all great advice. Yes, you can strip them, but I typically don't. If you use thin paint, if you use a nice thin base coat, I mean, you could just prime over them. I usually don't strip a model, but I use my paint really thin, so I don't glob up detail. And it depends on the material because like bones and other PVC can be very problematic to strip. You need to make sure you're not using anything too caustic. Same with styrene. Metal is the easiest material to strip because you can use stuff that's a little bit stronger. You're not going to damage the metal. But then if you have toxicity concerns, there's that to remember as well. But I'll tell you straight up, I don't strip a model. I just reprime it. Even with bones, which you normally shouldn't use regular primers on, if you have a layer of paint down, you can reprime over it. Just don't use a super heavy coat of primer. Bones 5 was like 60 cents or something per mini. Yeah, something like that. Yeah, the Kickstarter value is huge, Alfred. You want to get in on it when it launches, or at least during the initial run. We do let people sign on to the Kickstarter after it's done, but you don't get as good of a discount. So you get a much better discount if you actually participate in the Kickstarter while it's running. So that'll be all during the month of April. Yes, all during the month of April. Yeah, it's just paint. You can always paint over it. And that's the other thing, actually, Burr, is what Max said. Max Styles just said in chat. You want to keep your first models no matter how bad they look. And if they look terrible, that's even better because every mini you paint, you're going to get better at brush control. You're going to understand a little bit more about how the paint is working. They're going to get better. Like when you start this hobby, you will just exponentially improve at first. And so keeping your first model, no matter how bad it is super awesome and encouraging for you because then you can look back at that and look where you are 5 or even 10 models down the road and see how much you've improved. And that keeps you going. It's all about the wins in this hobby. Like I strive to keep people from getting frustrated with this hobby because it can be so relaxing. But if you've got anxiety, the first thing you need to do is to understand that to mess up is okay here. It's all right. You're learning. You're getting better with every mini. So you can't expect to be me off the bat. Like, you know how long it took me to get to this point? Like, to even paint, like, the ogre here? I've been painting for almost 40 years. That tells you a little bit, dates me a bit, but a long time. And I've been really concentrating on getting good at painting. I started really concentrating on getting good, like, in my 20s. So that's been 20 years of practice here. It's like, real practice. So don't ever get anxious about things being perfect. They aren't going to be perfect, but every mini is a learning opportunity. So go into it with that. The point of this hobby is to have fun. That said, I will say, lest you get like discouraged at the fact that I've had decades worth of painting experience to get here. I made my biggest progress in miniature painting during the course of only 6 months. So in all those years of painting, I went from probably a middling decent intermediate level to a national award winner, an international award winner shortly after that. Just with pretty much 6 months where I really focused on getting better. So it doesn't have to take years. There are plenty of people out there, people on this stream, people on the Reaper community on Discord, who started a year ago and they're already doing amazing. And it's because they've just really tried to get better. They've focused on deliberate practice. So there we go. Yeah. And if you guys are on my Patreon, if any of you are, and if you're at I think I did it for $10 level, but there is a PDF on there called So Why Aren't You Painting? And it talks about anxiety and fear and getting over some of these bumps. It's the first such PDF I've done. I don't do many self-help painting PDFs on my Patreon. I think I may be the first one. But it's really valuable because I also have gone through all of these things in the course of my career as a painter. I get all of them because I've been there with all of them. And so that's why I talk about that stuff on this stream, because I know it's real. I know the anxiety is real. I know the fear is real. I know the fear of messing up, the fear of I love this model and I want it to look really good and I'm afraid I can't do it. All that kind of thing. Like, I get it. I get you. It's there. So try, and I know how hard it is, but try to tell yourself, it's okay if I mess up. Put a neat base coat. Honestly, if you put a neat base coat on a model and then you line it, it's going to look great. Maybe you toss one highlight on, it's going to look great. Just get there and build from that. Speaking of lining, that's the next thing I'm going to be doing. Yeah, Luca, Miniatures Den, and Luca's amazing. And he's been painting for a tenth of the time I have. But I spent a lot of the rest of my time, doing other things too. I have other hobbies and other pursuits, so that's part of it. And I did take 10 years off where I just wasn't concentrating on improving my craft. So there's that also. Life happens. All right, let's get Rogue Shadow out because it's a red liner. I think I want to use that. Yes, right. Kerniko says, my first mini was a Pegasus painted in enamels. It was hideous. Yes, my first minis were also painted in enamels. They also were hideous. I'm very sad that I don't have some of my first D&D minis after that I painted for my college games, because I was really just block painting and they still looked better than most of my friends because I had brush control. So really, if you were going to do just a couple things to make yourself, get a little better, try to do a neat base coat and then do some lining to set boundaries on your model. And I'm about to demonstrate what that means. So I'm using Rogue Shadow. I could also use brown liner, but Rogue Shadow has been sitting on top of my desk for months now, so I'm using it. It's from a fast palette. It's not Gloom Engrave, is it? No, Death Knight Black is Gloom Engrave, and this is from the other one. The Surf and Turf, or whatever that one is. Maybe it's Adventure Colors. I don't remember. Lucas sold his soul for achieving that level of painting. No, he's just driven. It takes a certain amount of drive, and wanting it, And some people, they aren't there. They just want to really enjoy the hobby and produce miniatures that are, that are good enough to wow their friends and their parents. And that's cool, and that's exactly where they want to be. And then you've got people like Luca who are making a living at it. And to get there, you have to be pretty driven. You have to want it, because you've got to work for it. Well, he had a Fiat. Oh, Adventure Colors. Thank you, Quindy. Yes. You have a copy of Bob's first sculpt? Great blackmail material. Awesome, Julie. Oh, that's fantastic. All right, so if we just went ahead and we painted the armor silver and we, painted the shield and the cloak purple or whatever we wanted to do, we'd essentially have a model that kind of, it was painted, but it would be hard to see the boundaries between areas because it would just kind of be one thing going into another. So what we're going to do is we're going to line. And I do this typically after I base coat before I highlight. Because what I find is if I'm just looking at white primer or light gray bones, I don't get a good idea of how these colors are going to react to dark colors around them. Whereas if I line, which is putting a dark line between the fur and the things around it, then I've suddenly got a reference point. I've got both white or light gray, and I've got near black on the model. So it lets me assess more if my fur needs to go lighter or darker, or, you know, what it's going to look like. So I could make a comment here, but I'm going to like totally keep this stream clean. Oh dear. Luca. I guess we have to give him crap when we can, right? Because of all the pain he puts you through, Quindy. All right, so lining, if you think about your model like a cartoon character, and the reason we do lining on 28 millimeter is because these models are too tiny to really throw realistic shadows. Like, they're very, very small. And so when you talk to somebody who paints and they tell you, take your shadows darker and take your highlights higher, that's what they're talking about, is the fact that at 28 millimeter, we kind of have to punch things up a lot to make all of the details stand out. You can't just, like, on a statue, on like a 12 inch or a foot tall statue, you have the leisure to just like block paint everything and it'll look great because that's big enough that it's going to cast realistic shadows. But when you are dealing with something so tiny as this, with so many little details, that's no longer the case. And so lining is a very simplified way of shading. And I usually, if I had my way, I would teach people to line before I ever taught them to shade. Because if you are looking to develop brush control, lining is what's going to do it. Because you have to concentrate and do these little lines. You can get messy. The nice thing about doing it before you've painted any of the rest of the mini is that I can get messy and paint the entire interior of this armor, for example. I'll always be able to paint over it. And that's actually another thing about stripping a model or not stripping a model. It's acrylic. You can paint over it. So there's really no reason. I once painted the hair on one model 5 times, and that's 5 different colors, each with their own level of shading and 2 highlights. 5 times I painted over that hair, and I just painted over it. I didn't strip it or do anything like that. And only by the 5th iteration, which ended up being the last one, thank God, only by the 5th iteration did I actually start losing detail. Like, it took that many layers of paint, 5 base coats plus 3 times 5, 15 layers of shading and highlighting for me to even start to lose a little bit of detail on the hair. And that was pretty finely sculpted hair. It was Werner Klock. So yeah, speaking Luca's name gives you +1 innuendo. You're right. Yes, cat views. Cat will get you views, right? Okay, ready to go. But yeah, so lining I always recommend because it is a great way to build your brush control. And it's just putting little dark lines like between the orange here and the helmet. And sometimes you want it to be a really, really fine line. Part of the trick of lining is to get yourself a good brush so that you can do these thin lines a little bit easier. If you're using craptastic brushes in this hobby and then you switch to a really high quality brush, you will level up 1 level instantly. Because no longer will your brush fight you like some of the synthetic or cheaper brushes, which may not hold a great point. And if you're doing it like I'm doing it, where I've got only a base coat on one side and just the primer on the other, the pressure's off. You can't really mess it up. Even if I squiggled my paintbrush like all over either part of this, it would be the easiest thing ever to just touch it up because I haven't done any shadows or highlights or details. I'm just painting a little line. So even if I squiggled over his eyebrow or his eyeball, I would still just probably lay down a little bit of white primer, paint the orange over it, and it would be fixed. Red Links, today it is my traditional favorite, Da Vinci Maestro. So let's see if I have one that shows the Da Vinci a little bit better. This one's kind of old, so it's rubbing off. There we go. Here's a fresh one. This is the fresh new brush that I have not yet decided to abuse. So this is a Da Vinci Maestro. It is a Kolinsky, which is why that word Kolinsky is there, which is the top 2 grades of red sable. So it is a very high-end brush. This one is from Germany. You can also get them from France or Spain or Russia. The Maestro is the brand name, Da Vinci. The Maestro is the line, and then it's series is the shape of the brush, and the 1 is the size. So you have the brand, the specific product line, which is Maestro is the name for their Kolinsky line. And then the series is the shape of the brush. Series 10 is the round. That's a traditional brush shape. What you think of as a normal, quote unquote, brush shape. And then the 1 is the size. And other companies that do Kolinsky that I like would be Raphael, this is a Kolinsky from France. It's an 8408, which is a very pointy, very, very pointy brush. So when I get it down there, it's got a very long pointed end, which I like because it suits my painting style. You can get brushes that are a whole bunch of different shapes. For lining, I do find the skinnier, pointier brush is the way to go. Yeah, probably not Shadow Raven, you're right. But anyway, those are the countries that typically you get it from. And then you can go the other way and go for a very fat, short brush. Often companies will call this a miniatures series brush because it's a much shorter brush and it's more wedge shaped. It's fatter. If I put these two next to each other, you can really see the difference in the shape. This is an Escoda. It is also, as you can see, a Kolinsky from Spain. The main use for these guys, they carry a little bit more paint. They're good for thicker paint, and they're good if you use a lot of sideways motion. Some people I know, some painters I know, they do a lot of side blends and stuff, and so they're pushing the brush to the side. That's much more effective if you've got a thicker brush because it's stronger and it's got more body. A thin brush is just going to bend a bit more. So that's why the wide brush is worth more in that. So yes, that is totally a short treatise on brushes. Let us go back to lining. So as I put the line around here, you can see that it really makes the detailed edge here stand out. Like, it makes the face stand out. It separates it from the helmet. If you put a good solid base coat on a model and then you just line it and touch it up after you line it, obviously, because we'll all make slight mistakes during lining. But if you just did that, your model looked great because you would essentially have all of your colors down and you would defined the boundaries better. So you've essentially put a basic level of very stripped down shading on the model when you lined it. The next step would be just to put a very simple highlight on parts of the model, and then your model would look amazing. And you'd also generate a lot of brush control during that process. Because brush control is muscle memory, the more you paint, the better you get generally. But in order to build your brush control, you do have to try to paint small things. If you keep shying away from painting the very small details, like there are people who get scared of painting eyeballs and things like that, and they just try to paint the big stuff on the model and kind of let the little stuff go. If you do that, you're going to not make great progress. Oh, it's a button, I see, or a stud. But you're not going to make great progress with your brush control because you're never trying to paint small things, so you're not developing that fine motor coordination. So you do need to try to do it. I often tell the story of how I tortured a painting trainee in the early days. John Bono used to work for Reaper, and he was a friend of mine, and he signed on to help me quickly paint a bunch of models for studio. And I gave him a bunch of CAV models, which are kind of like Battletechs. So it's machines, and they all these panel lines. And I essentially told him, line these. So I handed him like 3 calves and told him to do lining on everything. Panel lines and all the joints, everything. He hated me. But his brush control at the end of that exercise was so good that he could freehand a mosaic floor on a model a year later. So it may be painful. But lining is the key to getting your brush control in line faster. In my opinion. It is an excellent exercise. How about that? Yes, well, it looks okay, but it's not going to build your brush control in aura. So that's why I say if I had my way and I got given a batch of new painters every year to teach, I would essentially teach them smooth base coats, lining, and basic highlighting before I showed them washes. Then they can, choose whether to do the wash once they know how to do it. But I want to give them the tools so that they can, paint anything. And if they have that much, see how much sharper the ears stand out now with that line. If they have that much in their toolkit and then I teach them washes, they can do almost anything. Like, at that point, it's all up to how much you practice. But I feel sometimes that going straight to washes from base coats, although it is easy and it does give you, some early win, nonetheless, isn't right for everybody. What is really? But I do find painters from time to time who email me, like who get on my Patreon and they email me because they're like, my friend tells me that I need to do a wash after I do a base coat, but I really don't think washes look good. What should I do? Is there a way to do a wash and have it look better? And I honestly look at them and I'm just like, you don't have to wash. You don't have to. There's nothing in the world that says you must do a wash after your base coat. But it's presented that way in our hobby. Like it's what most people think of as a logical progression. You should learn both, in my opinion. You should learn to line because it's going to help you paint the fine details on these models. Then you should learn to do washes. You could do it in the opposite order as long as you still learn to line eventually. Because the thing about lining is you may not want to use it for tabletop, but it is still going to make you have better brush control. And you do want brush control for tabletop. There are still details you'll want to paint. Yeah, everything is a tool in the toolbox. And I feel like lining gets just kind of glossed over, and just this is purely from the way that, from hearing from people who contact me with this question. And it is not a rare thing for people to ask me this. Do I have to do a wash? I don't like how it looks. I get that a lot. And I didn't like how it looked either, which is why I stopped doing it. So just little bits of, and as you can see, I'm getting a little, I get a little messy here and there. It's not perfect. If I have the room to air onto the primed side, I do. I try to avoid airing onto the orange fur because I don't want to have to touch it up, but now as I move into bigger models, I line less because as you do busts, you tend not to need lining. So Noli here does not really have lining. She has some contrast. She has shadows that differentiate things, but she doesn't have really lining on her, except maybe around some of this. You can see that I left some of the real dark shadows in place so that it would bring out parts of her. But when you're doing busts, and our captain bust is a little different. With her, I'm kind of doing a little bit of lining. You can see the lining between her hair and her kerchief, but that's because I feel like she's a very cartoony sculpt. And so I felt that the lining was appropriate for the style of the model. But you can, if you dislike lining, you can, when you work on larger scale models, dispense with it and just use your colors to create contrast. Yeah, exactly. Washes are not all created equal. But I still feel no matter which wash you're using, you're going to dirty the surface. And when the people who come to me and say, hey, I don't like washes, but my, significant other or my friend says I have to use them, what do I do? With those people, it's just like, usually what they don't like is the dirty effect you get. And I don't care what wash you're using, it will discolor the upper surface of the model. So it will make a bit more work for you, or it will change the color slightly that you put down first. That's the weakness of washes. Now, sometimes that's a strength. Sometimes adding that over the top will, it'll add detail. It may add richness to the color if that's what you're aiming for. But I tend to put down the color the way I want it the first time. So for me, I don't like them. But yeah, if you like them, use them. If you feel like it enhances your painting, use them. If you don't, then don't. You are able to make this call. It is your hobby. You may do what you like. That said, if you do go looking for feedback and people suggest, you could add some extra shading or a wash here or, blah, 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 and it's something that you decided you don't like, but you should still maybe listen just a little bit, because they may be suggesting that you do a wash, but really what they mean is maybe you need darker shadows, right? So if you are aiming to get better, taking people's feedback is great, but look at what they're actually saying, maybe not the specific of what they're saying. So maybe you should use a wash on this. Usually just means maybe you need some darker shadows. Or maybe that, there's texture that isn't being brought out by the painting that a wash would bring out. In that case, asking more questions is always useful. So everything depends on your goals. As others have said earlier in the chat, your goals as a painter. If it's to produce work that looks decent for the tabletop, so you can put painted minis on the table and be proud of them, or if it's, I want to paint well enough that I'm really happy with it and maybe, my friends will be impressed, or, I can maybe enter a competition or, whatever. Or I just want to paint display models to like the highest standard I can, which is me. That's my personal motivation in painting. Is I want to put a good enough paint job on the models I own that I really love, that I can be very proud of them and have them be display quality, so I can put them in our display case and be happy with them. So everybody's got a different goal, and your goals will change throughout your life as a painter. You may start just wanting to do tabletop and do it fast, and then over time you may realize, and I've seen so many people that this happen, but over time you may realize that you just enjoy painting. And then you start thinking, well, I want to get better at this, So kind of listen to your gut as far as what your goals are right now, and understand that you can always change them later. Nothing is set in stone. It is your hobby. And how you choose to develop in it is up to you, as long as you have fun. And sometimes having fun, if you have a lot of anxiety, having fun is going to be making yourself take a step back and relax about it all. And realize that it's just a mini. It's not life and death. You can always buy another one. You can always paint over a mistake. That's what's so great about acrylic paint. It's not like we're working in oils. If I make a big blorf, I make a big blorf. Bleh. Oh no, I messed up the mini. Oh no. All right, so how do I fix this now? Well, we wait for it to dry. And I grab some white painter primer, because essentially I want to bring it back to its initial state. So let's say I had painted this cape a light blue and I'd done that. I would choose to get the primer first, because if I tried to paint the blue over the dark color, it would be different than the blue painted over white. So I want to paint over this dark stuff with a paler color. Yeah, have fun, Shadow Raven. Yeah, contrast paints still discolor the top level of work. I mean, they do it less, but they still do add color. So, all right, so I messed up my cape. I'm going to grab some primer, and I'm just going to paint over it. Really thin coat. I actually didn't thin the primer at all because I wanted to be able to apply it precisely. I didn't want it to flow too much. If the rest of this cape was blue, I'd be brushing it a little bit onto the blue also. But I just want to mostly cover it up. And then I would And this is going to take me less than a minute to fix. Just a nice thin coat. Might want to do a second thin coat if I can still see it, but this might be good enough depending on the color of the rest of the cape. If the cape was just a regular medium blue, I could probably just go right over this and I'd be just fine. So it does not take long to fix things on a miniature. So second coat, make sure the first coat is dry. Otherwise you will pull up paint. And I'm brushing it on pretty thinly. Like I'm not leaving it in big globs. I want it to be pretty smooth. You could add a little water to the primer, maybe do 6:1 if you were going to, but it'll take you longer to cover up a really dark blorf if you do. There. I would just paint right over that with my base coat and I'd be fine. Ta-da! Wash done in a tiny area under tight control is still going to color it's still going to discolor the area. If you want that, then great. When you say pin wash, I actually think about panel lining, which is, lining with a wash with a pin, using a pin or a very thin brush. But, you can do a tiny wash. I could do tiny wash just on his face. It's still a wash. Still does the same stuff a wash does. I think I did. I don't remember. I think I did a handout for Reaper. I don't know if it's still online. This was done, Quindy, back in like 2019. The two goblins that Ron put out. I think I was using the new Dungeon Dwellers colors to paint them. They were orange. We did a write-up for it. I don't know if Reaper has all those write-ups collected on its, I think it was when we were doing the special, the Dungeon Dwellers figures, and like Rhonda did the one, she's done several, I think. But they're like PDFs. I did goblins, and I did one with a wash, and I did one with layering. And at the end, they both looked good, but you could still see slight differences between the two skin tones. I don't know. Yeah, they're all collected. Okay, awesome. So the goblin one there, I also sculpt dungeon flagstones in that, by the way. But the goblins there, I believe I did kind of an analysis. I did them each way. I did one with a wash and one with layering. At the end, after all my work, they looked very similar, but you could still tell that there was a bit of a difference. So it does make a difference unless you set out specifically to try to minimize those differences. I just painted them because I was curious. It also would vary by the color you were using. I was using an orange, which is normally not very high coverage. But that orange was pretty decent. So anyway, if you're interested, that's something I've done in the past. That was a long time ago. I don't believe it's been so long. I believe that the cat is a him. I talked briefly at the beginning of this about adding some area in the chest, about poofing out the chest a little bit, which would let you get more of a feminine shape. So you could do that. You could also widen it just a little bit to get more of an hourglass shape, and that would suggest a female, but I am going under the supposition that this cat is a him. Grumpy Cat was a girl, so I am equal opportunity here. I think he said pin. I haven't heard of this this thing either, and I assume it's a new fad or a new way of describing something. Not really a fad, but every once in a while a painter will excel at a particular execution on a technique. And they will we kind of make up names for it, right? Like I use side brushing, and that's probably a technique that other people would term something else. But painters do that. Like we find a little technique that we do a particular way, and we kind of name it, and then it spreads because people are like, oh, pin washes, or oh, side brushing, what's that? When actually it's something that's been around, but we're just focusing on it particularly as a technique. But yeah, I mean, pen lining is different, right? But pin washes, I believe, is what Pendrake was the term that he was using. Which apparently is a very small, tight, localized wash. And I've got a leg and a tail coming together here, so I'm going to put kind of a shadow right between them. See that line between the tail and the leg? Now here I could just thin that liner a little bit and let it kind of be a wash if I wanted to. There. So that's just our start. Wow, time is flying today. I don't feel like he's a Garfield. He's like way too fierce. Garfield was not fierce. I was a big Garfield fan when I was a kid. Also, I don't want to do tiger stripes on him. Not black, anyway. I don't want him to be a tiger. If he's a tiger, I want him to be a tiger in the way a domestic house cat is. So with darker orange rings on his tail and stuff. But I want this to be a very cat color. A very domesticated cat color. All right, a bit of a line there to separate out the tail. There were very small instances where Garfield was fierce, but let's face it, Garfield was often the Eeyore of that comic. He did push Odie off the table a lot, but you know. But fierce is not the word I think of when I think of Garfield. It's not the adjective that springs immediately to mind. Lasagna or no lasagna. What I'm going to do here is I'm also going to block in the eyes because I always like to have a dark line around them. So rather than drawing a dark line around the whole eye, which would be a lot more persnickety, I'll just fill in the eye socket. And then when I go in to paint the eye, I'll just leave that dark in the edges. I don't think ragdolls are the only cat that has orangish rings on a tail. My cat growing up had it. He was just a domestic short hair. I think it's common in tabbies. I just want to do an orange tabby cat. In honor of my cat as a kid. All right, so filled in those eyes, so now they stand out. I'm going to do the same here. I feel like... There we go. I need to block in the mouth between the fangs. Now, blocking in the mouth dark is going to let us actually see the fangs a lot better. His bared little teeths. And this is where brush control is your friend, but even here, if I blorfed, I would just take the white and I would go over it. Yeah, like O'Malley, Thomas O'Malley. That Corsair, you've nailed it. I was a big fan of O'Malley. When I was a kid, I loved that. I loved the Aristocats. And O'Malley was the best. So yeah, we're doing a Thomas O'Malley Paladin. So we've got our little fangs there. See them? So lining is precise, and it helps us to bring those out. And I'm going to put a little line up there, and a little line over here. I'll try to bring those out a little bit more. There. And we'll refine that mouth as we go. Because there's definitely some gums in between those teeth that I just painted over, but that's okay. I just want to get that mouth in place so I can see it. I don't think so. He's just got a thick... Persian would be much more fluffy. This is just a thick tail. He's got some good thick fur on his tail. And I owned a Persian at one point, and her tail would have been much like ostrich fan bigger than this. This is still a pretty skinny tail, all things considered. Yeah, that's what I agree with Kuroniko. He's floofed up because he's being fierce. I'm going to line also around the bottom of the foot. I would always put a shadow around the foot anyway. So in this case, it's kind of underpainting. And underpainting is when you paint part of something dark or light when the area around it is the opposite. And then when you put your base coat over it, it's just like painting over white paper instead of black. But paint looks different over white primer versus dark color or dark primer. So by putting this near black shadow here, I am going to create the effect of a shadow under his foot when I go to paint this stonework. And so I'm also going to block in a shadow underneath him. And the nice thing about doing this now is that I don't have to be precise with it. I can just kind of make a shadow where the light would be falling, and then when I put the gray paint over it, the area under him will naturally look darker because I've got this underpainting here. Usually I underpaint in white, and I do it to execute freehand, especially really fine freehand where I want small details to show up. So if you go to the Reaper YouTube and you look up, who's a good example? Actually, either of these. Our wizard, Darius the Blue, I did this with underpainting. And then the flames on the back of the Tiefling, the stylized flame design, is also done with underpainting. But that is done with white underpainting against a dark background. And the last one that's probably applicable would be Lizette with her brocade. These were also etched in with underpainting against the white underpainting against the dark green. So we've been doing a lot of freehand lately. A lot of freehand. I have to squish this guy on his base better. There. I like to swoosh my poster putty up against the base so that it holds it better. All right. Pretty decent. But yeah, on Reaper's YouTube, you can find all of my past episodes of this show, and we are getting close to 500 at this point. I think Quindy guessed that we'd hit it sometime in May. I'm going to actually get his little nose drawn in too. I haven't decided what color his nose is going to be yet. Probably pink. I don't know that it's going to show up very well against the orange, but sometimes I like to just knock that in as well. There we go. So the nose is blocked in. Great. All right. I'm going to grab a shadow color now, and I'm going to paint in shadows. I'm not going to do a wash. We could use Carrot Top Red, which is the highlight. Hold on. It's the highlight in this triad, or shadow in this. It's the mid-tone in the triad that highlight orange is in. This is the red hair triad. So all three colors will be auburn, carrot top, and highlight. But we won't go with auburn this time, I think, for any shadows we do. It is very red, and it's not. I don't really want to go in that direction. The other color I was considering using instead of carrot top, or mixed with carrot top, was actually Numeria Rust, which is probably a better and more natural shadow for this color. If you look at them, they work quite well. And Numeria Rust is part of the Pathfinder paint range. There's a lot of very unique colors in Pathfinder that are very useful, and Numeria is a good choice for this. Ow. Twitch. What? Twitch? Yes. Yeah, it is good for painting foxes, but sometimes I find it goes a little red. And if you don't want that, then think about subbing Numeria Rust in for Carrot Top. Because Carrot Top is definitely more red than Numeria. You can see it right here. So I think on this kitty, I'm going to use Numeria. I may put a single drop of Auburn into it. We'll see how the color looks. Because I'm going to be thinning it. I need to shake it a little bit better. Yeah, we auto block links. Just so, you know, to keep us safe from trolls. So sorry about that, guys. If you, usually that's why Quindy, I depend heavily on Quindy to be the one with the links. Yeah, people can look it up if they want to, Corsair. And I'm not like using him as a photo reference or anything. I'm just like remembering how he looked in my head and I'm deciding what I want to do. So I have decided to make this rather a fantasy cat, in other words. All right, so this is very orange. Probably a little bit too intense. This is a good rust color. But I think I'm going to drop a drop of Auburn Shadow into it. I'm not going to drop a drop of Carrot Top Red into it. Auburn has a tiny touch of black, and I want to knock the brightness on this down. So that's why I'm using this color. Also, since it's shading color, there it is. Yeah, that knocks it right down. That's a good color. Yay. So very dark rust now. It's a pretty color, actually. So I'm going to transfer a little bit of that over and thin it down a bit, just because it's really thick in the other part. There we go. That's better. So this is what I would call a layering consistency. It's kind of like, layering is kind of like painting with washes. Sometimes it's painting with thicker, slightly thicker washes, depending on the color. But as you can see, as this falls off the palette, and this is why porcelain palettes are kind of cool. You can see this, you can see the transparency right away on the palette when you thin down a color, so you can kind of judge how much is going to color the top surface. So this is kind of a thick wash. It would color everything pretty profoundly, but I actually want this to be stronger because it is shadows. So I'm going to paint it underneath his chin, kind of as a test area, because it's kind of in shadow, so it won't matter. I think I like that. And I think I want to paint it like right at the top here, on top of his eyebrows there. That shadow under the helmet. I think I want to paint it on the side of his muzzle a little bit. I want to paint it. The inside of his ears I'm probably going to go light on, but at least the top rim here I can do darker. And maybe the outside underneath part. So as I add in these slight shadows, you can see even more detail coming into the model. That's funny, Quindy. Mobrock, the base orange is a highlight orange, 9243. So yeah, again, just the top here. And I'm going to shade the back of the ear. I like to have control over where I put my shadows. This is another reason I don't use washes. I found eventually when I really looked at it, because I used to use washes for everything, just like many painters and gamers in North America, I got taught to use washes. But I never really liked how they dirtied everything up. And eventually when I did kind of tested not using them and just painting my shadows in with the wash instead of putting it over everything, I found that painting my shadows in actually saved me a lot of time because I didn't have to go back and touch up those top surfaces anymore. And put some shadows in back here. Definitely want to shade underneath here because the cape is here, so there's going to be a shadow. You can see it. So I'm going to paint this dark color over that. Oh, funny Quindy. Yeah, you can usually tell when a kitty is sick too if they have a pink nose and it goes kind of pale, whitish. Can be a sign of that they're sick. Oh. All right, so I'm going to shade just the underside of the tail here at first. And then I may mix this with a little bit more auburn and do some darker rings. There isn't a lot of room to do markings on this cat because he's wearing so much armor and clothing. So really the tail is the only place to put markings. I'm going to put a darker shadow here on the back of the leg there. So if I'm going to do some rings on the tail, let's actually start. Let's make this a little thicker. If I'm going to do a shape, I want this to not be as much like a wash because I want the shape to carry through. Oh, hey, we are pretty much at the end of the stream. Well, I'll put a couple of rings on the tail anyway. So let's bring in a ring. And this probably isn't going to be dark enough. You can see it. So I can kind of block in some ring-like shapes. But if I want these to really stand out, I'm probably going to need to darken them. And also highlight around them. But this is a good way to start. Subtle is an okay way to start when you're trying to make something look pretty natural. And then a dark tip. So we've got some stripes. The start of stripes. So as we continue doing shadows and highlights, I'll be emphasizing these and refining them and making them stand out more. But we at least have them kind of sketched in. Oh, except I totally missed the other side here. So now I need to find the top. Where's the top of my stripe? There's the top of a stripe. I'm going to start at the tip and go backwards, and then we'll call the stream. So let's get our dark tip on here. And I'm going to kind of look and see and say, okay, right about here. And then right next to it, it's another stripe. There we go. We've got our stripes marked in anyway. And as I go with these, I'm going to pay more attention to like the fur texture underneath. But at first, I'm just going to put the stripes on like the rings. Because I just want them marked in so I can work with them. There. Yeah, that works. Yeah, we don't have a lot of room for like the facial markings of a tabby. So we are pretty much, the tail is the one part where we can put markings on it. So we got our base coat on our fur, and we got lining, and we got shading. That's starting. And so now the highlights are going to really bring the details out. That's our next step. So, yes, Static, we're doing the Kitty Paladin. Catfolk Paladin. This is a Dark Heaven model, so it's metal. White metal. And I was just, we started it today. For some tiny details like the faces on these catfolk, I find that I like the metal a bit more. The more stuff goes to Bones USA, the less I'm going to care though, because the Bones USA detail is superior. So I didn't actually look to see if these were in Bones USA. I decided to go metal. I try to do a mix on this stream so that we can, you know, not always be working on one particular material. I was putting the little claws in. I use my liner to blacken the claws so that I can go back, and when I highlight them, they'll stand out. Same thing I do with the eyes. There, got our little claws blacked in. Excellent. Oh, I missed that. Oh, GVD, thank you. I almost missed your sub, 22 months. There was a lot of chat here. Yeah, Joshua, I'm sorry I missed your question. I rotate. I stream here on Reaper every day, every morning, every weekday, sorry. And we do a rotation of 6 models. So like yesterday we worked on the Hairfolk, who is getting closer to done. And all the models are typically in different states of doneness or progress. The day before that, we've been working on a Greek centaur from Greek Odyssey, and I was doing an Appaloosa pattern on him, because I wanted to have some fun that way. So we got an Appaloosa centaur going on here. And then we've got a bust, and we've got a couple of character models that we're working on also. So yeah, that's what we do. And I try to talk, today we talked a lot about stuff for new painters, like resources for new painters and kind of philosophy headed in, like how to get your head in the right space so that you're doing it for fun and not worrying too much about failing. And I gave some references to like different materials on like the internet and our YouTube, Reaper's YouTube, and my own YouTube to help beginning painters. So we do that a lot. So I handle questions. I paint to a pretty high level in the end, but I like to handle questions from all ability levels of painters. I worked my butt off to get here, Joshua. Some would say I don't know if I was talented at art as a kid. I was interested in it though. So I tended to develop skills that helped me become better. So, but it's been a lot of years I've been painting. So it's definitely been a lot of trying to get better. I still believe anybody can get to my level. Like absolutely hands down. If you care enough, if you want it, you can get there. It's work. Like it's been work, but it's fun work. Like, cause you're painting. I mean, come on, you're painting little pewter people or plastic people or whatever you're doing. But yeah, thank you. Alrighty, everybody. I think we've done it. Yep. Come on back at 2 p.m. for Crafty Creative for Josh to talk more about the terrain side of things. Cool, Burr. Or Beamer. Mur. I have to remember you're not Burr, you're Mur. But yeah, no problem. Anytime. So thanks, everybody. I will be back tomorrow. Tomorrow we are working on Lady Delia. We're going to get her skin tones going on. I think I might just go for it and do them all, like from top to bottom. Do the shadows and the highlights and get them finished out tomorrow. I'm still thinking about hair color, but yeah. So we'll be on that model tomorrow. The model we'll be doing a lot of freehand on eventually, and that'll be for Friday. Okay, great. I'm just making sure I didn't miss any last minute chats. Thank you everybody for tuning in, and I'll see you later on. Have a great Thursday.